Well, hello. Anybody have any idea what we're talking about today? Yeah, we're starting a brand new series today called After I Do. And whether you're married or not married, or your wedding was a long time ago, or you're still waiting for it, or you had it and it wasn't what you wanted, there's a couple things everybody knows about weddings, right? And so this isn't new information, but just kind of track along with me here. The wedding is supposed to be at least, part of somebody's highlight reel, right? You're supposed to be able to look back and remember that thing, and it's supposed to be great, amazing, wonderful, and there's going to be gifts, and there's going to be cake, and there's going to be songs and family, and just everybody enjoying themselves, and it's going to be a great day. But sooner or later, everybody goes home, right? The family goes home, your friends go home, and you go on your honeymoon or whatever you're doing, and then you get back, and then eventually it is just the two of you, just like the video said, and it's the two of you forever. So what does together look like after I do? Once you say that, what does together look like? What does it mean after I do? And so some of us, we have this in our minds, this picture, and we're going to show you this picture. Like, we think that, okay, it's perfect, that we're young and we're happy and we're getting married, and we're going to spend a whole lifetime together, and eventually we're going to do some goofy stuff to reenact what happened when we got married. That this is marriage. We all have dreams about what marriage is supposed to be and what it's supposed to be like. And the ladies, now I know I'm generalizing, so I apologize, but for a lot of ladies, when they think about it, they envision the perfect wedding, and they envision the house filled with kids and the happily ever after and the whole thing. That's their dream. For men, I hate to tell you this if you don't know guys very well, but for men, their dream is sex twice a day. And they're still dreaming because it doesn't happen, but everybody has all these dreams and expectations about where marriage is going to be and how it's going to go, and yet so often it seems like it's not quite what we expected. We had it all built up. We had it all figured out. And it turns out that it's a little harder than we thought it was going to be. And here's what's crazy about it. The world around us tells us it should be easy. And I'm going to give you an example of this, and this just stuff kind of blows my mind. So let's say you live here in the Phoenix area and you want to drive. You want to become a driver, right? Think, okay, driving is hard. Driving can be dangerous, and so we need some checkpoints. We need some things to make sure that somebody's certified to drive or whatever. So in Phoenix, you're 15 and a half or older, but at 15 and a half, you can go take a test to get a permit. You have to take an eye test, you have to take a written test. If you pass those, you then get a permit that you can drive with another licensed driver for 6 months or more if you want, but at least 6 months. And once that time period is over, then you can go back, you take another test, a driving test, and you get a license. But it's not a full license. You just get a license until you're 21, then you get the graduated license. And we do all that so that we don't have people driving that shouldn't be driving, people that aren't safe, and because driving is hard, we want to make sure people know what they're doing. When it comes to marriage, if you live in Maricopa County, you have to be 18, or get this, I didn't know this one was new to me, 16 with parental consent. So some of you got teenagers in your house, give them consent to get married, and you can get them out at 16. You don't have to wait. You can just get them out right away. 16, you can get married. And here's what's required if you want to get married. You go online and you apply for a marriage license. You pay $83. There's no blood test, there's no waiting period, and you get somebody to marry you. That's all it takes. And you would think, well, if that's all that is needed, then maybe it's really, really easy. But the reality is, it's really, really hard. Speaking of somebody that's been married for a while, and I love my wife and I love my marriage, but it's hard. There's difficulty there. It's not an easy thing to do. And almost everybody that even if you're not married, if you know people that are married, you know this is true. You know this is real. It is a hard thing. And so we've decided to take some time and talk about this because it is hard. You have to build your marriage on something that lasts. You can't build it on something temporary. It can't be a moment or an emotion or a memory. It's got to be built on something firm and strong and that is permanent. And so as we go through this series, what we're going to be talking about is for how you can build your best marriage. And it turns out that building your marriage on Christ builds your best marriage. Now, some people wonder, is it even possible to have a happy marriage, right? And it is possible, but not if you do it like everybody else. Not if you do it like everybody else. Because, and you might think, well, that's kind of arrogant for you to say that, but let me explain why I'm saying that. We know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 out of 2 marriages don't make it. They end in divorce. They never get there. And of the marriages that do make it, and surveys prove this, a high percentage of people would rank their marriage as satisfactory to unsatisfactory. So they're basically just kind of getting through it. They don't really love it. They're not enjoying it. It doesn't mean a lot to them, but they are married and they've stayed married. So there's a small sliver of people that are saying, my marriage is actually really satisfying and really exciting, and I'm glad I'm in it. Out of all the people that get married, it's a small slice that say that. And so that's why I say, you can't do it the way everybody else does it. You have to build it on something permanent. And that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about it in a couple of ways. Today, we're laying the foundation. And I know it sounds weird, but one of the keys to your marriage is you being inflexible. And I'll unpack that in just a minute. But over the next couple of weeks, what we're also going to be discussing and looking at is, next week, we're going to talk about expectations. That you got to have the right expectations. And this isn't about settling. And this isn't about, kind of this crazy love story, everything's going to be like a movie kind of deal. It's where do you find the right expectations? And better yet, what are God's expectations for marriage? So we're going to talk about that. Then the following week, we're going to talk about fighting. We're going to talk about not how you fight, because that's important. It is matter how you fight with each other. But what's a lot more important than how you fight is why you fight. And once you understand why you fight, and again, this will make more sense a couple of weeks from now. Once you understand why you fight, you should have a lot of fights, and you should have a lot of good fights. And we'll explain that, but it's why you fight, not how you fight, that matters most. And then finally, the last week we're going to talk about is giving it up. And it's not the it that you think, but we're going to talk about how your marriage is built strong when you give it up. And we'll explore that a little bit and talk about what that means. But as I said, today is about being inflexible when it comes to marriage. Now, we're starting in a weird spot, and I admit that. Because normally, if you want to do something that's hard, you go find somebody else that's done it, right? Somebody else that's done it well and done it a lot, and they're really experienced, and they're really good at it. That's the person that you want to learn from. But today, what we're going to find is some of Jesus' critics came to him and asked him a question about marriage. And it's in Matthew chapter 19, if you've got a Bible or the app and you want to follow along. But it's kind of odd because Jesus was never married. So they're asking Jesus questions about marriage, but Jesus was never married. As a matter of fact, we know that Jesus' dad died in his life. His earthly dad died when fairly young. We see him last when Jesus was 12. So he probably died sometime between that and the next time we see Jesus around 30. He died somewhere in there. Jesus was a teenager or a young man when his dad died. So he didn't even get to see this great marriage potentially play out in front of him. But yet people come and ask Jesus, what do you think about marriage? And here, this is Brett's opinion as to why would you ask somebody that wasn't married, that maybe didn't get to see a great marriage, not because they were having troubles, but because his dad died. Why would you ask him about marriage? And this is Brett's little simple theory, okay? If you can predict your own death, predict your own resurrection, and then pull it off, you kind of go with whatever that guy says, right? I mean, if you can do all that, we're just going to go with what you say. I mean, you seem to be a little smarter. You got a little bit more going on. You got a little more power, a little more insight, a little more stuff going on than the rest of us. So even though you haven't been married, there's a really good chance that you've got some great insights about being married. And so what happens is you need to understand, these are critics of Jesus that are trying to trap him into saying something that's going to make him look bad. But he uses that opportunity to speak to them and to us about marriage. And so Matthew chapter 19, verse 3, and it starts off like this. It says, some Pharisees came to him to test him. And they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, he said. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. In verse 6, he kind of gives a little interpretation. He says, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Now, when they heard that, they knew exactly what he was talking about. Jesus was actually quoting something from Genesis 2, and we're going to look at it in just a second. He was quoting it, and he said, listen, you guys know this, right? That when God has put something together, and that word joined together is a really powerful word. It's this idea of being glued together or welded together. He said, when something is so stuck together that it becomes one thing, you can't pull it apart again. You shouldn't separate it. Even if you're one of the things that have been joined together, you shouldn't separate it. It doesn't work like that. So he tells them, this was God's original intention. This is what was God's design. And by the way, this is just a freebie. When it comes to anything important in life, they were asking Jesus, hey, Jesus, everybody else says, hey, you can get divorced for any and every reason. What do you say? Jesus' opinion, Jesus' direction was, hey, when it comes to the important things in life, don't worry about what everybody else says. Don't go by what's popular. Don't go by what the crowds are saying or the government says or your friend says or anything else. What you need to do is you need to go back and see, what did God say? What did God say about this? Because that's what's most important. Because everybody's opinions change, but God doesn't. You need to know what he said and what they were referring to when they said, can a man divorce his wife for any and every reason? In their day, in their culture, they had frankly, a terrible system. And it was just that if a couple got married and the husband at some point decided either he didn't want to be married anymore, he didn't like her, he liked someone else, he just decided he wanted a different life, all he had to do was in essence write out almost like a receipt, a bill of divorce, I divorce you, and sign it and give it to her, and she's out. But it's a horrible situation for women because they're living in this tension of, I don't want to make him mad. What if he kicks me out? And my marriage is always hanging by a thread. And by the way, as a woman, you have absolutely no say in this. You have no ability to get a divorce on your own. Everything hangs on your husband. So it's just a horrible, horrible kind of situation. And he's saying, that's what culture says. What do you say? And he says, what was God's intention? And I want to read it to you. If you want to look, that's fine. It's in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. But I just want to share with you, this is kind of the original design, if you will. Way back at the beginning, when God made Adam and Eve, Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, it said, the Lord said, it is not good for him, it's talking about Adam, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. In verse 19, now the Lord God formed out of the ground all the animals and birds in the sky, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. And just by the way, that was for Adam's benefit. God wasn't surprised. Like, oh, you know what? You don't like the cows? I mean, you don't want to hang out with the cows all the time? He was showing Adam that I'm going to do something special for you, something different for you. And while all this creation stuff is good, this is at a whole nother level. But I need you to understand that, Adam. And so he let Adam go through the process. Verse 21, so the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and he closed up the place with flesh. And then the Lord God made a woman from the rib that he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why, and this is what Jesus was quoting, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And this is such an important passage, and we don't have time to talk about it all today, but it speaks to so many issues. It speaks to gender. It says God created them, men and women. It's not something that changes. It's not something that's based on an opinion or a feeling. God established gender. It talks about sexuality. God made man for woman and woman for man. It gives us insight into what that's supposed to look like. It tells us about marriage, that marriage is supposed to be permanent. And this is God's design. And here's why this is so important, and I believe why Jesus went back to this and why Jesus pointed them at this. He said, don't worry about what everybody else is saying. Don't worry about what's popular. Here's what you need to know, that God doesn't make mistakes. He makes masterpieces. God doesn't make mistakes. He didn't have a uh-oh moment. He didn't not understand something. He didn't realize things might change. God doesn't make mistakes. He makes masterpieces. And when we go against his design, it always leaves us frustrated. It always leaves us discouraged and disappointed and feeling like things are against us and it's not working. And my goodness, things are hard anyway. Why would we go against design and make them harder? And Jesus is reaching back and saying, listen, don't go by what everybody else says. Go by God's design. And part of that is understanding that in God's design, marriage is permanent. There's not an out clause. It's not temporary. It's not for now. It's not as long as. It is permanent. And they're probably just like you when they heard him say that. Yeah, we get that. We know that. But come on. I mean, you see the world around us. You see what's going on. You see how things work out. I mean, obviously, there's got to be some kind of exception, right? I mean, come on. We're in the real world. Look at verse 7. Matthew 19, verse 7. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Jesus in essence said, yes, you're right. There is an exception because of sin. Because sin is a reality. It has pushed itself into God's design. And because of that, there is an exception, so to speak. There is a way to work through something. And it's an extreme case, this extreme case, where these two have become one. And sexual immorality has violently and in an ugly way torn apart that connection. He says, yes, in that case, Moses did not command you to get divorced, but he said you could get divorced in that situation. It's a concession. Because sin is real, because things don't always go according to plan, there is that concession there that in case of sexual immorality or adultery, yes, divorce does happen. He doesn't say it has to happen. He says you can, but you can also choose to forgive. And I think what Jesus' message in all of that is, I mean, it's pretty clear, but when you back off from a 30,000 foot level Don't base your marriage on a concession. Base your marriage on God's intention. I told you earlier, you can absolutely have a phenomenal marriage. You can have the marriage of your dreams. You can build a strong and healthy marriage. But it's not gonna be the way everybody else does it. It can't be. It has to be different because we've seen what everybody else does and how it works for everybody else. And that tells us it's got to be different. There's got to be something unique and special, that we have to be inflexible about marriage. And I share with you a little story from my own life to kind of illustrate this. And I don't want to say right up front, I gave the right answer, but I didn't give it in the right way. And so I was wrong in the way I answered this question that my wife asked me. And so I was wrong because of the way I answered it. But the answer itself was actually right. Don and I have been married a little over 29 years. And we were in one of those seasons, I don't know, it was like year 3, year 4. And we had this situation where, if you've been in any kind of relationship, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where stuff had just kind of stacked up over several weeks and months. Like we had a lot of little mini fights and little mini arguments and little disagreements and, people kind of rolling their eyes and hands on the hips. And well, that's what she does. I mean, I just walk out, So we had done our stuff and we had kind of had this. And then finally we had the big blowout. You know what I mean? And what we were fighting about wasn't what we were fighting about. We were fighting about the 5 little fights that we had before, right? And it just happened to all show up at one time. And we're going through this, and she didn't say it as a threat, and she wasn't, blaming or anything else, but she just said, I cannot do this the rest of my life. I can't live this way. And some of you are like, oh, I've been there. I get that exactly, And me, in all my wisdom, my answer to that was, well, we're not getting divorced, so you better get used to it. It's going to be a long life, happily ever after, And that wasn't the right way to answer that question. But you got to understand, that's an example of, and it wasn't because I was super smart. It was because that was just what had been instilled in me. The marriage is permanent. And in a way, which I know some of you are going to object to this, it doesn't matter if you're getting along right now. It doesn't matter if you're happy at the moment. It's permanent. It's a covenant. You have to be inflexible about this. It's not, yeah, we'll see. Or maybe so, or, as long as everybody is, it's permanent. You see, the best way I can think to explain this is, for a lot of folks, unfortunately, they look at marriage as a contract. And you know what a contract is. You've signed contracts. You signed your rent. You signed your car note, whatever it is. Contract is there to enforce your legal rights and to protect the other person and their rights. And so it's very straightforward. The contract says this, so I have to, or I'm in trouble, or you have to, or you're in trouble. That's a contract. Unfortunately, a lot of people look at marriage the same way. As long as you make me happy, as long as you support me, as long as you do the things I want, as long as you act the way I want you to act, I'm in. But if you break the contract, I'm out. And God says, and Jesus, pointing back to this, no, a marriage is a covenant. It's a covenant. It's a 3-person covenant. It's between you and your spouse and God. And a covenant in the Bible is something, you need to know this. It comes from a word that means to cut into. And the idea behind it is very simple. If you remember Moses in the 10 Commandments, if you maybe saw the movie, or you were hopefully even better, you read it in the Bible. Moses goes up on a mountain and he comes down with these stone tablets. And on these stone tablets are carved in these laws for his people to live by. That's a covenant. It's cut into the rock. It's permanent. It's a cut on the skin that never heals, that leaves a scar. It's a permanent mark. And that's the idea behind this language for covenant. And Jesus says, your marriage is a covenant. It's not a temporary contract. It's a long-term, if some of you said these vows even, till death do us part, so help me God. It is permanent and forever. Maybe you've heard of Billy Graham. I know as the years go by, less people know who he is, but Billy Graham was this incredible, amazing evangelist that preached at one time. This was before social media and all the other stuff and the internet and all that, but he was heard by more people live than any other person in the world. More people had actually heard him speak than any other person in the world. I mean, he was this incredibly popular preacher, evangelist that went around telling people how to follow Jesus. He traveled to different I think he was on every continent. He would hold stadium events. They put him on TV. I mean, he was the biggest deal going when it came to faith and religion for a time. And his wife's name was Ruth. And you would think if you were Ruth, like, man, this probably is a good guy to be married to. I mean, he's a preacher, he's popular, he's really nice, he's a good-looking guy, he's tall, he's friendly. I mean, everybody seems to like him. And I mean, it probably so easy to be married to Billy Graham. But the reality was, it was not easy to be married to Billy Graham. And not because Billy Graham was a bad guy, but because Billy Graham was on the road so much. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year sometimes that he's gone. And she's running the house and keeping the checkbook and taking care of the kids. And she's trying to, in essence, do all this as a single mom, even though she's married. And later in life, they asked her, did you ever have any hard times? And she said, yes, we had hard times. We had hard times just like anybody else would. And the interviewer asked her, he goes, well, did you ever consider divorce? And she had this great answer. She said, divorce? No, I never considered divorce. I considered killing him, but I never considered divorce. You know, I wasn't going to get divorced. It's permanent. It's permanent. And for some of you sitting right here right now, you're like, I get all that, but you don't know where I'm at. I don't love him anymore. I don't love her anymore. Just can't do it. I've tried. I've made the efforts. I've forgiven. I've loved. I've been patient. I've tried to change. Okay. Can't do it anymore. And can I just say to you, and I mean this with compassion, so please hear it that way. Getting divorced because you ran out of love is like getting rid of your car because it ran out of gas. I mean, that makes no sense. If your car runs out of gas, you put more gas in it. If your marriage isn't rolling and isn't the dream marriage, you put more love into it. That's what you do. You don't give up on it because you made a covenant. It's permanent. So don't just walk away from it. Pour into it. And again, I know you're saying, you don't understand. When he comes home and he plays video games and he ignores the kids and I can't get any response out of him and he just wants to do his own thing and it's kind of like we're roommates and he just wants me around when he wants me around and the rest of the time he doesn't. Or she's constantly on me. She's always telling me the things I got to do different. She's always correcting me. I mean, she doesn't even let me park the car. I parked the car wrong. You know, it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I am out of love. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're actually at a really, really key point. And you need to hear this. Because there's something amazing that happens if you are willing to tap into what Jesus will do for you. Because the Bible tells us that God is love. The Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit pours out love into our hearts even when we don't have any. And so you're saying, my marriage, I'm out of love. I don't have any more love. I don't have any more forgiveness. And God says, let me pour it out into you and through you. Let me do that for you. The Bible says that God is love. It's not something that he does. It's who he is. And if you're hearing that and you think, well, that sounds really good at church. Sounds like good preacher stuff. That God will help me love my spouse even though he's an idiot or even though she's horrible. You know, God will help me, yeah. I just don't see it. You're misunderstanding how powerful covenant love is. Covenant love will lead Jesus to endure the cross. Covenant love will raise Jesus from the dead. Covenant love will provide forgiveness for all of your failures and all the mistakes that you've made, and it will set you right with God. That's how strong covenant love is. Covenant love can change your heart, and it can change your marriage. But Jesus said, he said, Moses allowed you, permitted you this because your hearts were hard. And so many times we think, well, that's not the reason my relationship's messed up. My relationship's messed up because he won't support me. My relationship's messed up because she's always nagging me. My relationship, blah, 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 blah. And Jesus says, no. It's a hard heart that breaks relationships. It breaks marriages, it breaks friendships, it breaks families. It's hard hearts that break relationships. And so it becomes so incredibly important to not have a hard heart, but to have a soft heart. How do you do that? What does it look like to have a soft heart? I mean, if that's the key, then that's what I want. That's what I need. And there's two things I want to share with you as we wrap up. How do you have a soft heart? And the first one is very straightforward. You have to live in the triangle. You live in the triangle, and you're like, what does that mean? that in essence, there is this triangle, and I'm going to show you a picture in just a minute, but we're going to come back to this diagram over and over and over the course of this series. It's like I said earlier, you're in a covenant when you get married. It's between you and your spouse and God. And so let me show you this picture, this triangle picture, and what happens here is just incredible and amazing. If you move towards God, what you find in your marriage is you start moving closer to each other. The closer you move towards Christ at the top of the triangle, the closer you end up with your spouse. And if you leave Jesus out of it, what happens is it's just based on you being nice. But when Jesus is the focus of it, I told you earlier, I said you got to build your marriage on something permanent. You got to build it on Christ. That's what builds your best marriage. When you both pursue Christ, you both end up closer together. And I've seen this over and over and over in my own marriage. And I'm going to keep using that because it's the only marriage I've got. But in this marriage that I'm in, over the last 29 years, what I have noticed is we have hard times and good times just like everybody else does. We have times where we like each other and where we don't like each other. We have times where I want to be in the same room with her, and we have times where she does not want to be in the same room with me. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes when she's upstairs, I'll just yell, Donna, Donna, what? What are you doing? Why don't you come downstairs? I'm needy. Anyway, we've had our moments. We've had our stuff. And when we hit one of those hard seasons, I've seen it happen dozens of times. One of us moves closer to Christ. We get more intentional about following Jesus. Our hearts get soft, and our marriage changes that quick. It doesn't mean everything is solved, but it means as you intentionally pursue Christ, it softens your heart. And it changes all of your relationships, but especially changes your marriage. And so if you're sitting here today and you're in the middle of a marriage where you're kind of like, it could be better. It should be better. It's not what I expected. What should I do? The best advice I could give you is so straightforward. Pursue Christ. Pursue Christ because it will soften your heart and it will have an impact in your marriage. So that's the kind of the internal thing that you're going to do. We're going to be inflexible about marriage. It's a covenant. It's permanent. It doesn't change. But we're going to be flexible within marriage. We're going to live in this triangle. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to keep our eyes half closed. Keep your eyes half closed. Now, let me give you a little context for that. Whenever I talk to couples that are getting ready to get married, we're doing premarital counseling. One of the things I tell them is you need to go into this thing eyes wide open, right? You need to ask any questions that you have. You need to know about their history. You need to know about their quirks and their life and their preferences. And you need to understand their values and who they are as a person. I mean, you need to go into this eyes wide open so that you don't find yourself looking up 3 months later going, who is this person that I married? I don't get this. I don't understand this. I mean, who are they? You need to go in eyes wide open. And if there is something that you feel could potentially be a problem, none of this business of we'll get married and they'll change later. No. You got to deal with that right now. You go in eyes wide open. But then once you get married, you're going to live the rest of your life eyes half closed. Eyes half closed. You're not focused on all the problems that they bring to the marriage. You're not focused on all their weaknesses. You're not constantly harping on them about all the things that they don't do right and their quirks and their uniquenesses and their problems and the struggles that they have. No. It doesn't mean to deny them and pretend like they're not there. You just don't focus on them. You keep your eyes half closed. Your job, once you get married, is to relate and appreciate. Your role is now to relate to them and appreciate what you can about them. One of the things that's happened, COVID hit, and you guys all know about all that stuff. People stayed home, and unfortunately, a lot of marriages blew up during COVID. But some didn't. Some actually maintained, and some even grew during COVID. And so they started doing some research. Why did that happen? What happened? And so one group talked to 11,000 different couples. Find out what was the key, what mattered in your relationship, and during this crazy time where people aren't at work and they're at home and the kids are home and just all the craziness that went with it. And they said the number one factor in marriages that maintained or improved was appreciation. Your spouse appreciated the other one. And that hit home to me in such a powerful way because, and I'm going to give you a silly example, but it shows how powerful this is. Every night on Tuesday night, I get home and I grill. Chicken, steak, hamburgers, bratwurst. Somebody said, we're coming to your house on Tuesdays. No, it's just enough for me and my family. But every Tuesday night, I grill. It's grill night. I love it. I look forward to it. I really do. I'm like, even driving home on Tuesday, I'm like, I'm making steak tonight. I get excited about it. And so I grill every Tuesday night. And I've done it for years. And I don't tell my wife this, but I would do it even if we weren't married. I know it kind of seems like, I'm taking care of dinner for the family. I would do it anyway because I just love to grill. So I grill every Tuesday night. And without fail, every Tuesday night, we've done this for years, 50 weeks a year, 2 weeks on vacation, whatever. I mean, just years and years and years, done this, I don't know how many hundreds of times. As we're finishing up eating, as we're putting the dishes away, she says, hey, thanks for grilling. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you doing that. And it's just, she's got so many other things that she could focus on. She's got so many little problems and quirks and issues and stuff that I do that she could focus on. But she chooses to focus on the one thing that she can say, I appreciate this. And it's the same for you. If you're in the middle of a marriage, move towards Christ and then live eyes half closed. What can you appreciate about them? If you're a follower of Jesus, that's how you build your best marriage. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but if you're not a follower of Jesus, the best advice I have for you, love each other, try to be nice, and good luck. That's all I have because I don't know what else to tell you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, allow the covenant love that he loves you with to transform your marriage and transform your life. Let's pray together.